Alrighty, a little change of pace. I'm in a mood to work on Mac's engine. I've got a few new things to put on it, so let's get to it. I've got new fuel lines, or at least, restored fuel lines. And I also have fuel injectors ready to be installed. These are the original fuel injectors, but they've been cleaned. And I'm excited to see if it's improved. I'm also a little bummed out on the transmission. I had some issue with some supplier parts, which I'll talk about later. So when things go wrong, I always switch gears. This will be fun. While the fuel lines are being rebuilt, I also redid some of the plating on like these injector rails, some of the clamps and the hardware brackets and so forth. So looking better. These are the original fittings, and what I did is I cut off these clamp ferrule pieces. It doesn't nick the fittings as long as you're careful, because you got the rubber kind of buffer layer there. Once everything was cut off, I was able to replate these parts. These were professionally plated. Normally I get things clear zinc plated, but I paid 20 bucks extra and got all this gold done. The plater does my engine test stand rings, and so they can also do car parts, and so I always just add them to the bucket. Doesn't cost me a lot. After it was plated, I take it to a local hose shop, and they're able to put these Porsche style crimps. I mean, they're slightly longer, but they look pretty authentic to me, and the hose I chose is fuel injection. It's Continental fuel injection hose. It's 300 PSI. Non-conductive, made in USA. This is about the best fuel hose you can get for use with the factory fittings. There are higher quality motorsports tubing that you can use, but the fuel injector rails, they all have this metric fitting, and if you want to go with the motorsport grade stuff, that requires typically AN fittings, which means tons of adapters and all that business. So you guys know from the very beginning, I've had multiple phases in mind for Mac. So phase 1 was the 912 engine. Phase 2 is this engine in stock form, including all the injector rails and stuff. Phase 3 is higher performance engine, which includes individual throttle bodies, larger stroke, larger bore, all that stuff. So when I go to phase 3, I will likely redo the hoses with more motorsport grade components. So Mesa Hose is local to me. Their cost for crimping on the hose and the cost of the hose with the collars and stuff was $54, $53.69. Compare that with brand new Porsche hoses or even Griffiths or any of the aftermarket companies, and this is a big savings to do it yourself. The ethanol in California fuels is not very easy on this rubber fuel line. The only hose that's really impervious to ethanol, at least a lot of ethanol, is PTFE lined hose. It's great hose, but like I said, the PTFE is too slippery for these barbed connectors. You need a special clamp type connector in order to use those lines. The guys at the hose shop, basically they deal with people in motorsport and just street cars all the time. They said 5 years is about the life of this Continental hose with California fuels, just E15 or E10. So every 5 years you should replace your fuel lines, and it is sort of a bear to get to these fuel lines on this engine, but if the engine's dropped, it's pretty simple. This fuel line here, or almost all the fuel lines, have the factory VD marking on it. This is probably original to the car, which means it's no longer soft. If you compare the stiffness of that hose versus this hose, this one's really flexible. This one is hard, and when it gets hard, it starts to crack. Also, this engine's been sitting for a number of years. Last time it ran was in Illinois. Here's the inside of the hose, and I think this is what takes most of the beating due to the fuels today. Take a look at this one too. This one has a Porsche part number on it, and it's probably the best one, but it still doesn't look great. And then the cool thing with the fuel injector service is not only do they fix them, but they document them kind of before and after. So I don't have any driving history with this car. So I kind of wanted to start fresh. And this is really the best way to do it because they tell you right away whether it's good or bad. This is the original injector, just basically cleaned, calibrated, and flow tested with new hardware, new O-rings. Everything is nice and good to go. So it's important that once the service is done that you don't let them sit too long. You need to flush them out with fuel pretty soon. And here's the test report for each of the cylinders 1 through 6. So number 6 we just showed was flowing at 199 cc's per minute, and it was dripping. So the spray pattern is supposed to be a kind of a cone, and this was just dripping. Now it's flowing at 240 cc's per minute, and the pattern is excellent. So if you look at the ones that were not doing well, number 5 was only flowing 176, and the highest was 229. So a big disparity, plus the pattern was not good on any of them. Now we have them all within, I guess it's around 2 cc's per minute, and the pattern is excellent. So it's a cool service. I think this was about $180 or something like that. And they give you back the old parts. These are all the old O-rings and stuff. But inside each injector is this little screen, and it's a fine mesh. So none of these look particularly clogged, but they put new screens in them, all new caps and O-rings and stuff, so that's worth it to me. They're called RC Fuel Injection in Torrance, California. There's the phone number if you want to call them. You can mail it to them. And I'm just going to put a tiny bit of rubber grease on the O-rings when I push it into the rails and the heads, or the manifold. See how clean that injector hole is? Doesn't need a lot of grease, just basically go around that. Then we'll drop it in. Feels good in there. Number 5. So now it's time to install the injector rail, which is the fuel supply here on the top. So same thing, just a little bit of rubber O-ring grease on each of these O-rings here. Not too much. You don't want grease inside there. And then this guy sits down right on top of that and screws into here at the same time. So you want to get those threads kind of started. And these bolts here really secure everything in place, so those injectors can't go anywhere. These are the original bolts, just replated. It doesn't really cost any extra to get the bolts replated, so I'm using these. You can buy new bolts if you want. The other nice thing with original parts is they always fit. We can plug these wires in. There is a little rubber seal, so make sure the rubber seals are in all these connectors, but it should just plug right in. This was wire tied here, so I'll probably re-tie it up to the rail, but you can leave it down here if you want to, but it's better for the wires if they don't vibrate. I think we'll do it like that. So that's one side done. This side of the engine is done now. I just did the same thing as the other side, put the injectors in and the fuel rail in. So now I'm going to work on the new fuel lines and try to button this up. I think last time when I took this out, it came out from this direction. So I'm going to do that again, probably this way. there's just a few things. Here's a connector. You don't really want to damage that. So got the wire harness. Everything's kind of here. So this side here is finger tight, and then this bracket is where it attaches right there to the manifold, and then it carries on over to this side. So that all looks right. Let's look at the other side and see how it is. Aside from this vacuum hose being on the wrong side there, I think it's okay. See how it dips underneath? Probably shouldn't do that. So let's go ahead and attach this bracket. So that screws on there. And then this bracket should go right onto this regulator, just underneath it like that. Real close to the wire harness there. And then this side, I left it uncrimped because on Mac, I don't have the stock fuel filter there. So this will connect to something else. I almost forgot these little guys. These are clips that go on the fuel injectors and keep everything in place. And snap those on. These look brand new, but they were also replated. And this line here should be pretty easy. Should be good on that side. I'll tighten this side. Now, this vacuum tube came out, so you always got to check your vacuum lines and make sure they're routed in the best possible way so they don't get pulled. Now the last little bit of hose is, this is the old one, this is the new one. It goes from here up to here, and this side gets a hose clamp, this side is screwed on there. And because it's such a sharp turn, you know, this is kind of a molded piece, and it was, you know, it fit right there. This one is cut a little bit longer, tried to reduce the angle there. But the other thing that you want to do is you don't want this hose to collapse. See, if I was to put it in, see how it necks down right there? That could cause some fuel pressure problems. So my trick is to use a spring inside the tube. This is for the return line, and you're not going to obstruct the engine performance or obstruct the fuel flow with the little spring inside. So let me show you. So this spring will go inside the tube like that, and what happens is it prevents the tube from collapsing on itself once it's installed. Just kind of working that spring down in the hose. I just use this tool to kind of, you know, push that spring inside there. So I can feel with the tool that it's all the way here at the end. But now when I bend this, it will not collapse. See how nice that is? You could probably heat this tube up with boiling water and try to form it that way. But I don't want to subject this to any more heat than it already needs to be. So we'll just do it this way. We might want to cut a little bit off because it looks like it's just a little too long. That looks pretty good to me. Just added the rest of my gold goodies here to the engine. This stuff was just easy to replate, kind of low-hanging fruit. I like it. Looks nice and gold and new, although some other things need to be refreshed. But that's not my priority right now. The priority is just to get this thing, you know, running well, safe in the car. Like I said, phase 3 is going to do away with all this stuff. The one thing I do want to refurbish is the fan. Everyone loves a nice looking fan. You know, this should be the same gold here in the center and then nice aluminum on the outside. So, you know, we'll get to that stuff, guys. Just got to be patient with me as I as I go through my weird phases. But it's about time to start it up and get some fuel flowing in the system, make sure there's no leaks, make sure those injectors are nice and happy. So let's give it a crank. This is showing, you know, bad oil pressure, which that light should go out soon. Fuel pump does a prime and then it should start. Let's see. Looking for leaks. Oil lights off. A little bit of oil from down here. This is where I had the valve covers off, and it's definitely leaking a little bit of oil inside the heater box. And that smoke's clearing up pretty quick. So I got, you know, the back doors open and the side doors open, so it's not that bad, but I'm gonna go outside for a bit. No leaks anywhere in the fuel system, which is great. Only leaks I have now are on the valve cover gaskets. When I did the valves, I haven't fixed it, so that's why I'm getting so much smoke out the heat exchangers. It's just dripping on the headers. This thing is almost ready to go in, valve cover gaskets, and we're there. So let me rev it up a couple times, and then I'm gonna talk about the transmission. Here's the deal with the transmission. So I've been very particular about getting the pinion depth set up. What I'm running into is when I put the nut on the back of this here, this piece has to be on so everything clamps together correctly. What ends up happening is the nut is tightening here on the shoulder like that before it's actually clamping the whole gear set together. And that has me concerned. So I've been assuming that I had done something wrong, and yeah, I've already discovered, or Mike has already told me about these washers being on the wrong side. There should be one on each side. And I fully agree with that. That's something I can move onto this side, but it's not gonna change the total stack of the gears. So I've gone through, I have 2 of these transmissions, I've gone through and double checked the heights of all the spacers, the thrust washers, the needle bearings. I've spent a ton of time on this. And come to find out, you know, this is a new bearing as well. Come to find out, this is the old bearing, and the Sierra Madre, who I got this bearing from, sent me the wrong bearing. It's too narrow. So it's almost as if, you know, sort of 2 wrongs make a right, because last time I put this in the center housing, these bearings look like they were in the correct place, even though the washers are on the wrong side. This bearing should be 20 millimeters thick, and this one's only 16. So that's why when this is all stacked together, you know, this is only probably 20 millimeters thick here. It's not enough distance to get the nut torqued correctly. And there's no washer that goes underneath the nut. It actually torques right onto that piece. So I eventually figured it out, but this is after I've already pressed in the race into the intermediate housing, so I've already had to remedy that situation. I still need to pull this whole thing apart again, replace the incorrect bearing, send it back to Sierra Madre. They won't even pay for the return shipping, and like I said, it's caused a lot of grief. I'm not able to finalize the pinion depth until I'm really comfortable this nut is torqued correctly, because that does affect the stretch of the whole shaft and so forth. So I'm still stuck, you guys, also waiting on suppliers, not Sierra Madre this time, but I ordered these shims from someone else and they aren't here yet either. I'm gonna bag and tag and make my own little museum of original Porsche bearings. You know, this is the FAG. So I'm gonna tag exactly where it goes, the serial number it came out of. So if this ever comes up again, I'll have my own little catalog of original parts, because replacement parts are not always made the same. I'm triple checking everything. You know, as a newbie, you have no choice but to be very, very confident in how it's going. And that's why I discovered some of these issues. So thank you for all you guys who are helping along the way. Cheers.